Hello everyone and welcome. Make a cup of your favorite drink and get comfortable because this is a wonderful time for new stories from Yellowcat. Send your own stories in the comments below and maybe they'll be in our new video. Subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed yet. Let's get started. Redditors who walked off the job without notice, what straw broke the camel's back? Part 5. My house/workmate and I were being severely overworked to the point of illness. Our team had quit, leaving just 2 of us to finish a job that should have been done by 6 people in the same amount of time. My friend passed out at work and hit his head, but he still had to work. Then I hurt my wrist and thought it might be broken, but our boss wouldn't let me leave town to get an x-ray. She told me I didn't need to use my hurt hand as an excuse because I have another one. We clean the house. That afternoon, my work/housemate and I called our HR manager, who, long story short, recommended we quit. Our accommodation was tied to our job, which was a shame. My roommate from work and I had to pack and clean our whole apartment overnight so that we could call in sick at 9 a.m. the next day and not have to meet with our boss again. It had been 4 days since the initial wrist injury by the time I managed to get an x-ray. I found out I had a hairline fracture. I was verbally abused by the marketing consultant in a meeting. Why did I put the title in quotes? Because it turned out she was an old-fashioned office space-style management consultant who was sent to kill jobs and destroy the whole company. I was hired as the IT director for this small but growing business. 6 people. They came up with a technology that most people use these days. I'm not sure which one. After 6 months on this dream job, this marketing consultant shows up. He or she is said to be friends with the CEO. I never found out what their relationship was really like because he did what she said even though he got messed up in the end. She'll be known as Sue. The CEO tells us that Sue will be joining the team to help market the product. Sue starts her day by interviewing everyone for the job they already have. "So you program in HTML?" she asks me when she gets to me. That's not a programming language, and how would you put CSS into everyday English? That doesn't make sense since it's not a thing. I was told that I had to go to a marketing meeting. Even though I didn't understand why I had to go, I did. There was nothing in that meeting that I could understand. I inquired, "I know I'll need to catch up, but what exactly did you mean by marketing term?" What did she say? "That means you need to explain why we're great. You need to tell people too." A loud, resounding "you" was the first thing she said when she answered any of my questions. It's me, the IT director. I didn't understand a word that was said in that meeting, so it might have been in Swahili. Still, it was my job to get clients. Okay, this is getting long. I know what Sue is doing after about 4 months on the job. She's there to break up the business. I told everyone but the CEO what I thought in a quiet way. Why does everyone else? Because all of us were hired from a company that had been broken up and sold off. What did they do? Nah, must be my PTSD. Lightning doesn't strike twice in 1 year, does it? 3 weeks before everyone got their termination letters, Sue led another meeting about marketing that I was in. She scolded me for not doing my job because their client base had dropped. Remember, my job was to keep the computers and software up to date, which was never a problem. "OP, you've done absolutely nothing to keep our clients and nothing to get anyone interested in signing on." She was mad at me, but I wasn't sure if it was personal or just part of her plan. I just stared at her. Now I had my own. The meeting was over around lunchtime. Got my things together, left my work phone on my desk, and went to a fancy sushi restaurant for lunch. I never came back. I was due for another meeting after lunch. They were pretty peeved when I never showed up. Ever again. The others? 3 weeks later, they all blew up my phone to tell me the company had shut down. Just like I told them it would. Not exactly without notice, but it's a good story. Worked as a shift lead at a busy coffee shop owned by a nice couple. The woman they hired to run this store was very tough. She wouldn't take no for an answer and could barely work a full day without getting tired. Her lunch breaks were between 1 and 3 hours long, and she took a 15-minute break every 2 hours to smoke. She often left work 1 to 2 hours early. No one else could take breaks longer than 10 minutes, and even though we worked a full shift, our lunches were only 30 minutes long. Besides her favorite worker, most of our co-workers didn't like her lazy nonsense or her slacker attitude. She would forget to place orders, and we would run out of ridiculously important things in our store. To keep things going, we would have to cut parts of our menu. Even worse, she was paid twice as much as everyone else in the store and kept the tips for herself, which was against the rules for managers. As a person who likes to keep track of details, I would always add up my tips before the end of each shift. Tips were split up by how many hours you worked and whether you worked the day or night shift. I kept falling short even though my math was always right, and I wondered if I wasn't taking something into account. It turned out that another shift lead and I were onto something. We combined our knowledge and found out that our manager was changing the hours of all the other employees to make it look like they worked less, while also changing her own hours to make it look like she worked super long hours. We started keeping track of this by keeping our punch-in and punch-out tickets and printing out a list of our accumulated hours before our manager calculated our time for pay. She then lied about the numbers on the list after she had done it. After 3 months of this, I was told to bring it to the store owner. The owner didn't believe us and said he would ask the manager what she thought. We offered to show him proof, but he wouldn't take it until he talked to her, so he never saw what we had on her. She denied everything and called us poor workers trying to mooch off the business. I had already found another job, so I told the owner I was leaving because of the terrible situation and the fact that I wasn't getting paid enough and my tips were being stolen from the manager. After we sued a few months later, our whole team got back pay for over a year's worth of lost tips and hourly pay. The coffee shop went out of business and the manager was jailed for theft. The hilarious thing was that her husband was fired and jailed for the exact same thing at his place of employment only a few months later. Everyone on our team used the money to fund themselves while unemployed until they all found better jobs. I ran into the owner a few years later, looked him in the eye, shook my head, and said, "I told you so." I will never forget that man's shameful expression. Which actions of your HOA or neighbors made you dislike them? Part 5. We lived in a huge house when I was younger. My dad sold his business and moved to a new town to start a new life in a big house. It was wonderful. We built a huge pool. He probably spent close to $300,000 on the pool, landscaping for the whole yard, and outdoor kitchen, and other things. Mind you, my dad had to send in all of these plans that had already been approved by the HOA. Anyway, 6 months after everything was finished, my dad gets a letter in the mail saying that he's in violation of HOA rules because the landscaping around the back of the pool, which was basically 3 huge flower beds made out of railroad ties with palm trees planted in them, is closer than 10 feet to the back fence. This meant that we had to change the pool to be in compliance. A letter from my dad to them that I think said something like, "Go F yourselves," was written by hand. We never really heard much about it after that. I would have to double check with him to find out what really happened. I was only like 7 or so. When my wife and I moved into our new home in the summer of 2019, the neighbor on either side warned us about the renters in the house right next door. It was said that they like to get into trouble and make things way worse than they were, almost to the point of paranoia for everyone around them. We thought about it, but there were no problems for the first 6 months or so after we moved in. Their house is on a hill behind ours, so they can see most of our backyard because of the difference in height. Well, one night, or morning, really, around 3 a.m., we wake up we get Ring notifications on our phones that show video from our front doorbell. A man in shorts and no shoes is standing on our porch and pounding on our front door. If we just watch him on the app for 2 or 3 minutes, we think he might be drunk and have the wrong house. That is, giving him the benefit of the doubt. Hearing him say things like, "Come out, you effing P, I'm gonna F you up," made us leave the porch and follow him around the side of the house to our backyard. Since we had no idea who it was, my wife calls the police right away and I leave our bedroom and head for the outside doors to look and listen for any signs of a break-in. At this point, our neighbors directly behind us shine a huge spotlight into our backyard from theirs. We thought it was cool that they knew something was wrong and were trying to help us by doing this. After a long wait, the police finally show up and knock on the door. We tell them what's going on, and they go out back to look around and get information from the neighbors using the flashlight. The spotlight neighbor turned out to be the one on our porch. He had jumped over our fence and into our backyard, and then into his yard where he turned on the light. He told the police that it had happened a few nights before when I let my puppy out into my own backyard in the middle of the night. He said that I was trying to expose myself to his family because they could see our whole yard from theirs. After telling the police this, he showed them evidence in the form of videos he had taken through our windows of my wife and me doing normal things like chores, watching TV, etc. Nothing weird or scandalous, but it didn't matter because we were in our personal space. By going out of their way, they might be able to see through our closed blinds because of the difference in height. So they were filming us for no reason and thought the police would think that was okay? When the police came back in, my wife was devastated. Not only did they invade our privacy, but they also made accusations against us that were completely false because we hadn't done anything to make these people mad and hadn't even met them. The police told us, just don't worry about it. If you try something again, give us a call, which wasn't the most comforting at the time. They moved out a few months later without any additional issues, and my wife and I celebrated like it was a holiday when we saw the moving van in the driveway. I had a crazy lady that used to live on the other side of a half-double that was effing nuts. It used to be that she would point a camera out her door and record her old broken-down car. She would bother people in the neighborhood and say she would call the police on anyone who walked by the front door or parked too close to her car. Once, she called the police on me because I was bothering my wife. I told her to go do her own thing and stay away from my family. The police came to my door and told me she told them I was going to hurt her. I did not get into any trouble. When the police talked to her, they saw that she was crazy because she kept changing her story. That crazy woman calling children and youth saying I threw my daughter into a wall was the worst thing she could have done. The jerks from Children and Youth came to my house while I was at work and asked my wife to let them look around. No one told my wife that these two women were the worst C words ever, but she let them in anyway. To see how the kids did in school, if there were any problems with the house, if there was food in the cabinets, and so on. This is where things go wrong. Even though we didn't do anything and my wife went along to whatever they asked, they still told my wife that I'd have my kids placed in the system if we didn't take anger management classes. Keep in mind, we hadn't done anything in the first place. Their court date was set for a few months from now. Every day, I called their office to talk to the S who was living in my house, even though I had never seen or talked to her before. They didn't call me back. I spoke to people and wrote it down every day for 2 months. Anyway, finally got to the court date, and my lawyer destroyed those people. I probably could have sued them, but it would have cost too much time and aggravation. But this was the last thing she did. I thought, thank God, after they moved out and away from me. Now we can be at peace. I got a letter in the mail from the judge telling me I need to go to court because I made another violent threat against her. It had been over a year since she had moved. The best part is that the papers say the city she moved to is more than an hour away. My lawyer and I showed up, but she didn't because she was a GD psychopath. Thank goodness that was the last time I heard from that jerk. When I was a kid, this happened to our neighbors. It was the exact opposite of an HOA because they didn't do anything. These bushes were planted by our neighbors on our block. These are the type with roots that grow everywhere. If they got into their neighbor's sewer system, it would boil their water. The man tried to tell his neighbors about it. At one point, he even tried to give them proof that these plants were hurting their water supply and sewer system. People in the neighborhood didn't show up, so the man went to the HOA. They didn't do anything because their rules didn't say what they could or couldn't plant. Instead, the guy and his family took their neighbors to court and sued them. The family won, but the neighbors lost their house. They had to move, and the house sat empty for 2 years while the bank owned it. If you want to watch the part 4, click the link here. We're very glad to see you all in the comments again. Many thanks for your support.